like to begin this morning with a short parable, actually. Okay. So, the kingdom of God is like when the master of a great house invites many people to his mansion for a great feast. As the guests arrive at the door, they are asked to remove their shoes and wear the slippers or the Crocs made available for them. Many happily take off their shoes, but those who refuse shall not enter the mansion. They may partake of a portion of food brought outside, but they shall never enter the mansion. They shall never sit in the master's chairs or even meet the master. So truly I'm telling all of you, remove your shoes, enter and feast. Do not delay, for the door will soon be shut, and those who do not enter shall eat no more. I would like you all to keep this parable in mind as we read the scriptures this morning and seek God's word. So why don't we all turn to Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. Okay. I'll be reading from there. Okay. So Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. It says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will find you rest. I will give you rest. Take up my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I'll read that one more time. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. I will find and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Amen? Amen. So this morning and this evening as well, I'm going to be talking about this specific call of Jesus, right? So in the scriptures, there are a lot of calls, right? God's calling out to those who are blind. God's calling out to the people of God. He's calling out to the deaf. He's calling out to anyone who has an ear, let him hear. He gives calls out to the Jews. He gives calls out to the Gentiles. But in this passage, Jesus is giving a very specific call. So who is Jesus calling out to? What do we see here? All who are burdened. All who are weary and burdened. Okay, that's how the CSB translated. All who labor and are heavy laden. Okay, so in order to understand whether this call applies to us and what does this call mean and what's Jesus offering here, we are going to ask the question, what is a burden? And what are the burdens that we have? So this morning I'm going to talk about laying our burdens down, because that's what Jesus is calling us to do. We come to him with our burdens and we lay it down. We lay down our yokes, the yokes of this world. And then this evening, we'll also explore what does it mean then to take upon his yoke, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. Okay? So what is a burden? Okay, what is a burden? So in this passage right here, Jesus, of course, is using the imagery of the farm, which they're familiar with. And they're talking about oxen. You guys know what oxen are, right? You guys know what yokes are? Yokes, when the yoke, it means it was for joining two animals together, right? The animals, when they would have to plow, they would attach bulls to a yoke. It would be like a long bar with two circle things, I don't know, things for the neck that they would be attaching to this. And this would be what they would use to have the animals move forward and plow. But then it's not just yokes that Jesus is talking about here. In fact, what he's primarily talking about is burdens, okay? And these burdens are the burdens that, the imagery here is like a camel, or like If you remember, that's how they would travel back then, by camel, by donkey, by mule. And what would they put on the mule's back? Burdens, right? They would put all the burdens and all these things on the mule's back. And here's the thing about burdens. Whether it's burdens on a mule, burdens on a donkey, or burdens on a person, the word for burden there, it comes from the word to carry, which means that these burdens, you have to hold them, okay? Burdens cannot simply be transferred from one person to another. Burdens can't simply be transferred off the donkey, okay? So let's say you're a traveler, maybe you're Paul, you're someone in the first century with a donkey, with a mule, and you place the burdens on the mule. And then you hear the mule going, right? You put a lot of it, maybe you have your pots, your pans there. If my family was in the first century, we'd put a microwave on top. Well, they don't have microwaves back then. But we'd put our whole kitchen on top of the mule as we're traveling to Jerusalem. We'll put everything on top of the mule, and the mule would be, if the mule is 4 feet high, he'd become 3 feet because he'd have to be crawling on his knees because it's such a heavy burden. But if you're a traveler and you put some burdens on your mule and you hear your mule making those sounds, it's a very weak mule. I don't know what sound a mule makes. But you hear the mule making these sounds, what are you going to do? No, you're not going to take off the burdens. It's the first century. You don't care about animal rights. What you're going to do is you're going to take your stick and then you're going to hit the back of the donkey, right? You're going to hit the back of the donkey. You guys got to think first century, not 20. Maybe if you had burdens on your dogs today, maybe like you hear your dog is weak, then you take the burdens off. But you shouldn't be riding the backs of your dogs anyway, so that's okay. But in the case of the mule, if the mule seems too weak, you hit the back of the mule, and if the mule still can't carry it, what do you do in the first century? You kick it, and if you kick it and nothing happens, you hit some more, and if you hit some more and nothing happens, you get another mule, right? You get another mule, and you put the burdens on that other mule, and what do you do with that old mule? Goodbye, right? Either sell it. I don't know if you'll eat it or roast it. The meat will be very tough, but you know what? Whatever you need to survive, right? So burdens are meant to be carried, okay? You can't just leave the burdens on the ground. The burdens can't, if you're a traveler and you're traveling from Jerusalem all the way to Samaria, which is unlikely because they don't like each other, but if you're traveling from Jerusalem all the way to Samaria, then you need your burdens to be carried, okay? You're not going to leave them at home because otherwise you're going to have to buy new things. So one thing that's important to know about burdens is that burdens need to be carried. Okay, remember that. Burdens always need to be carried. Okay? Someone say, who? Someone has to be carried. It doesn't matter how heavy the burdens are, but if there's a burden, then it needs to be carried. Okay? And we're going to figure out who's going to carry the burdens after that. And we ourselves, we have many burdens, right? If we trace back historically, all who labor and all who are heavy laden, where does the burdens start? Where do we begin with the burdens? Where does it begin? No, historically. You weren't there in the beginning, so you don't know. Who do we see the burdens beginning with? Adam and Eve, right? When Adam and Eve fell and they sinned, what happened? What did God do to the ground? He cursed the ground, right? Because of the sin of Adam and Eve, God proclaimed a curse on the ground. And now, instead of it just being easygoing, like, oh, there's a fruit, you can pick the fruit. Oh, there's an apple, you can eat the apple. No, now you have to work the ground. And not only that, because the Bible says they were supposed to cultivate it anyways, but now when they work the ground, out of it comes thorns and thistles, weeds, all these sorts of things that they're not going to want to eat, all these things that make gardening much, much harder. Before, where the earth was just watered abundantly, now we have droughts, now we have all these sorts of things. And now, what's interesting is that the Bible says, by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, right? Because no longer is things easy going. Now work is associated with sweat. Work is associated with labor. How many of you do a work that requires you to sweat? Anyone here? Okay, we have one person here. If you do physical labor, maybe it requires you to sweat. How many of you, when you work out, you sweat? Right? How many of you, when you work out, you think you're going to sweat, but you actually have to drive home to pick up your kids? You end up not doing workout, right? You don't sweat. But by the sweat of your brow you shall work. By the sweat of your brow you shall be eating. Okay, this is the beginning of all labors and all burdens. Burdens and labor begin with sin. All this hard work, all these problems that we have, it all begins with sin. And we see that here. And so now Jesus is telling us, if you have these burdens, if you feel heavy laden, if you feel like you're being oppressed, if you feel all these things, then you are burdened. And now, come to him. Come to me. Okay, come to him. Now, so we see that here, and we see that with the work and with the famine. And then later on in the scriptures, we see even more burdens when it comes to the Israelites. How are the Israelites burdened? They were slaves in Egypt, right? We're children of Abraham, who's also, Jacob, Isaac, all those people, but they were slaves in Egypt. And again, the reason why they were slaves in Egypt, it all points back to the garden. It all points back to sin. Okay, so the first thing that we should know, so we know now, first about burdens, is that someone has to carry it. Okay, so now we're going to begin listing off some burdens and explore what those mean in our lives. So the first burden, which all begins where it begins, is the first burden is sin. Sin is a burden. Can everyone say sin is a burden? Sin is a burden. The Apostle Paul, he tells us that there are some things that he knows he should not do, but he does it, right? And the things that he knows he should do, he doesn't do it. Okay, that's sin. And we have to ask the question, why is sin so burdensome? Why is it so heavy? You guys have heard the term heavy heart, right? If someone has a heavy heart, if someone is very guilty, they need to do something because they feel like they have this burden of guilt and shame inside of them because they have sinned. Okay? We see people stress out when they have affairs. People stress out when they lie to your parents. Do parents here know when their children are lying to them? Yeah. Right? Your children are not comfortable around you when they're actively telling you a lie. And so you can see the burden that it carries upon them. We also see people burdened when they've stolen something. Even kids, as a kid, I remember that even if you didn't mean to steal something, the moment you realize you did something wrong, all of a sudden you feel so guilty, so burdened. I remember one time, my brother, my kuya, he took like a packet of something. I forgot what it was. It might have not even been sealing. It might have been like a silica gel packet. You know the silica gel packets that are at the store to keep the things dry, like in the shoes? And I remember he took something like that, like a small little packet from the store, and then when he realized that he brought it out in the store without paying, not knowing that we didn't have to pay for it, he immediately felt guilty. And not only that, one of the reasons why sin makes us feel burdened is because then other people will pile up on the guilt. Because I remember when he took that, then all of us, which was just me and my parents, because we were very little back then, all of us then we started teasing him about it too, right? Like, ooh, you stole, the police is gonna get you. Oh no, we're gonna have to return you to the store also with the packet, right? Everyone makes you feel pressured and burdened even more. And then you feel like you're not able to do things. One of the most common mental illnesses in America is depression. And one of the things that can cause depression is severe guilt, right? When you have a lot of intense guilt a lot of regrets, you will not be able to do the things you normally do. Even in ministry, if you have a lot of hidden sins that you're hiding, it will prevent you from fully operating because you know that you're preaching under a lie. You'll know you're doing all these things. You have to understand that sin is a burden. But just like all other burdens, it needs to be carried, right? All burdens need to be carried. If you have sinned, you automatically allowed someone to put a burden on your back. Let's say you're a donkey, you're a mule, okay? By being there, there's a burden on your back. By sinning, there's a burden on your back. And in the same way, do you think that when God created mules or God created donkeys, God said, I create you so that you can be so tired and so people can put things on your back? Do you think God created mules like that? I don't think he created donkeys to be like that. In the same way, God didn't create us to sin. God didn't create us to carry the burden of sin. We were not created to sin. We know that very much in how much disappointed he was by sin. But because of that, now we carry a burden of sin. Okay? Let's go on. More burdens. Okay? There is also burdens of survival. Can everyone say burdens of survival? Burdens of survival. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. I was talking to the youth last week, and I was asking them about certain times in their life when they realized something, right? There's a certain time when you start comparing yourself to other families, right? Seeing financially, thinking like, are my parents rich? Are my parents poor? And not only that, even if your parents are well-to-do, there becomes a certain point in your life also when you start asking about your own independent financial situation, right? You start asking, wait, my parents have money, but I have nothing. When I'm out of this house, will I be rich? Will I be poor? Will I be able to survive? Will I be able to eat? Will I have 3 meals a day? Will I still be eating Filipino food? Am I only going to be drinking water and eating dust? We ask these questions to ourselves because survival is important to us. Okay? Survival is important, and survival is one of the burdens that we bear. And it goes along with different things, like, for example, burdens of provision. Will the Lord provide? A lot of the times, sometimes we don't even think, will the Lord provide? We just think of our own schemes and our own plans. Okay, will we eat? Another burden of survival that has to do very much with today is even the burden of school. Okay, a lot of your children are very, very stressed out. More stressed out than you can think of, right? Sometimes we like to say like, oh, kids have it easier today because of all these things. But sometimes I look at James and Joel and the things that they have to go through, and I know that their burdens that they have is a lot harder than mine. Because when I was in elementary school, we did not have easy access to a computer and to Wi-Fi. And so at first, the teachers, when you're a kid, back before the internet or anything like that, you're at home, and then the teachers need to forgot to let you know to do something. So what do? They just let you know the next day in class. Oh, you have to do this. Here's another assignment. Here's another thing. Okay, and you're like, okay, I'll learn to space out my time. But then, in some small communities, the teacher realizes you have to do something, and you're already outside playing, you're having fun, and then the teacher calls home and says, oh, sorry, I forgot to let your kids know to do this. And then it disrupts your fun, and then you become sad, right? And then we have email, right? And so now the teacher, if they forget to do something, or let's say the teacher wants some more requirements, they just email your parents. They email home to everyone. And now, even worse, the students have emails too. And the students have access to websites. I remember when I was in high school, because this is when that started coming along. When I was in high school, sometimes I would check as late as like 10 p.m. just in case my teacher snuck up on something and added another assignment. Because, the teachers will say, oh, you have access to the student website, so you need to be able to figure those things out. These are burdens that are just being added more and more and more and more to students. Right? I'm a TA for some classes at Trinity, and I don't have to come in every day to help with the classes, but sometimes I wish my professor didn't have my phone number, because sometimes I'll be at home chilling, or I'll be doing my own thing, and it's maybe 20 minutes before class, and she'll text me. She's like, John, can you come in today? Can you teach the class? Because I'm like, my whole day was ruined. My whole plan was ruined, because now I have to come in. Because there's such quick and easy access, now we have even more burdens. Okay, so understand that even children, they have burdens themselves. And that burden doesn't just stop when you're a kid. You also have burdens of work if you're an adult. Especially if you have children. You're not just thinking about if you can survive yourself, right? Some of you, maybe you want to not go to work one day, and you're like, what if today I didn't cook? I can fast for the day, right? I can fast and pray. But then you have a husband or a wife, and you're like, but they have to eat too. They have to survive too. And then you decided to have kids. So when you think of just resting a little bit, you're like, but if my kids don't eat, they might not survive. Wait a second. Oh no, that's a crime. But you think of all these different things. There's more and more burdens being laid on you. The more people you're around, the more burdens you have. For some of you who are single and want to get married, right? From the youngest to the oldest, sometimes that's a burden in itself, right? You want to have a husband or a wife, and you feel burdened because you don't. Singlehood can be a burden. I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me, John, you don't understand how hard it is that I'm not married. Everyone in Trinity is getting married. You don't understand how hard it is. I'm like, I'm not married either. It's not that hard. But for some people, it's a greater burden than for other people. Some people, they really are burning to get married. They really feel that burden. And it's a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. They get married right away, right? And there are even more burdens if you are married and then you don't have kids, right? Another burden that people face today is fertility. They want to get pregnant. They've been trying, and it's not been happening. It's another burden right there. The point is being here that no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, even if you've achieved great things, you're going to have burdens. And we need to understand where we can find place to leave our burdens, because sometimes we think there's burden in being poor. Okay? If you don't have a lot of money, you feel burdened because of that. And so most people, because there are worldly ways to leave our burdens behind, worldly ways to take care of our burdens. So let's say you are not as rich as you thought you would be, you're feeling poor. What will the world tell you the solution to that burden is? Money, right? Money. Oh, I feel burdened because I don't have a lot of money. I don't have my own house. But I know that once I have money, then I will solve that burden. This weight will be lifted off my shoulders, and when I have kids, they won't ever have to worry about money, so that burden will forever be gone. And so I'm going to pursue money. But what does the Bible say? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Just when you think that you're solving your burden of money, your burden of not having money with money, you're wrong. Because then money will turn into an idol, and then you'll want to work more and more and more, and then you take a mortgage on this, you take a mortgage on that, you buy a new car here, you buy a new car there, but you're paying off all these loans, and you become even more and more burdened. I have some friends who, because their income level of their family is just maybe like $1,000 more than the line for the cutoff for FAFSA, they're not able to get as much scholarship as me, or as much grants. And they, even though they grew up having more than me, they're like, man, I wish I didn't have it. I wish I grew up poor so that I could get full scholarship, or I wish wish my parents didn't make as much money so that they wouldn't be having to pay for college right now, right? There are different ways that money will get you even more and more burdened. So money is not the answer to your burdens. For people who are uneducated, right? Sometimes to get more education, or maybe people who are educated, sometimes education, they think, if I just know more, knowledge will be the answer to all of my burdens. If I'm able to learn more, then I'll find the answer to this, I'll find the answer to this. But even for you, you know that knowledge, you keep going in a deeper hole, and sometimes you just look at the bottom, and there is no answers, right? The world will never be the answers to our burdens. Why? Because how can the people who created your burdens be the ones to carry your burdens, right? How can the people who put you in debt be the ones to help you get out of debt? Like we said earlier with the illustration with the mule, you put the burdens on top of the mule because you need them to carry your stuff. Are you going to take the burdens off the mule? No, right? Because you don't want to be the ones carrying the burdens. It's not going to be like for a mile, your mule carries all your luggage, and then for another mile, you carry the luggage while the mule relaxes and walks along, right? No, if anything, what you're going to do, and this is what the world will want to do, is that they'll want to deceive the mule a little bit, or they'll pacify the mule. That's another thing, that you can't pacify your burdens. Maybe the mule is feeling so heavy. So you ever see those, I don't know if people do this in real life, but in cartoons what they'll do is they'll put a carrot on a stick and they'll put it at the end of the mule so the mule just keeps on walking forward. So there's incentives to get the carrot on the stick. But is the mule still carrying the burdens? Yes, right? Or maybe, we have thanks to modern technology, what you can do to that mule today, you can shoot it up with some heroin or morphine, right? That way the mule won't feel the pain of all the burdens, and they'll be able to get. So sometimes that's what the world will do. They'll shoot you up with their heroin and morphine of having all these physical pleasures and all these worldly possessions. Like people who are burdened to get married, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just have meaningless sex, right? They'll have sex with so many people so that they feel that pleasure which marriage brings. But then really what they're doing is they're just shooting themselves up with all these drugs to distract them from the fact that ultimately they still have a big burden, okay? The world will not carry your burdens. Everyone say, the world will not carry my burdens. They will either pacify you, they will either trick you, they will either deceive you, or maybe they'll just straight up give you more burdens. Okay? The world will not carry your burdens for you. The world is a cruel master, Satan is a cruel master, and he only comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so he will not take away your burdens. Okay? Even sometimes when we have mental burdens, sometimes we have the burden of grief. Right? We've suffered with the burden of grief. Sometimes we've suffered with the burden of loss, or maybe mental illnesses and things like that. And then the people, sometimes psychology can help temporarily a lot of times, right? A lot of times, a lot of forms of therapy can help you temporarily, but only if you keep on coming back and back again, keep on venting. Because one thing that the world will do to help you is distract you. They'll say things to you that feel distracting so that you can avoid your grief, you can avoid all these things. But understand this, that only gives you more and more burdens. Because then you become reliant on that, and then you're not able to function without it. So the world will not take away your burdens. And so, of course, we go to Jesus' words once more time when he says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So if you want rest, if you want refreshment from your burdens, who do you go to? To Jesus. God actually gives us a foretaste of this before Jesus came down to earth with the concept of Sabbath. Right? Today, a lot of us are practicing the Sabbath. Because 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th you shall rest. All 6 days you're carrying your burdens, but when you come to the 7th day, you stop. Right? You're supposed to rest and cease. That's another problem. When you don't practice the Sabbath, you're just piling more and more and more on top of your burdens. Okay? More and more. And so God gives us a foretaste of that. But if you remember in Hebrews, it is told to us that now we have to enter into the Sabbath rest. It's an eternal Sabbath rest in which we are no longer carrying our burdens. And that's why Jesus said, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart. Okay. So here, Jesus is explaining to us why he is able to take on our burdens. Right? Why is he able to take on our burdens? What are the two reasons here? What is it? Number one, for I am gentle or meek, depending on translation. And what's the second one? He is lowly in heart, humble in heart. It's funny here because sometimes when someone wants to help you, right, Superman comes down. Who's someone that Superman saves? Lois Lane, right? Lois Lane, she's being tortured or she's been kidnapped, and then Superman comes in. And he's got his laser vision, he's got his fists that are fists, and he punches everyone, and he flies in, and he saves the day, and he shows off his power. But for Jesus, he says the reason why you should give him your burdens and take on his yoke is because he is meek and lowly. Meek and lowly. Are these typical signs of someone who can carry your stuff for you? No, right? Let's say when you get older, right, you'll be carrying your stuff. Maybe if you're like Tita Jo, you'll be carrying a whole bunch of stuff with you all the time. You have a blender with you in your bags. You have all your concoctions with you, and you're always you turn your Sienna into a mule, and you have you have everything in there, right? Or maybe my mom too, right? My mom doesn't understand yet fully the digitizing all her forms and stuff. So if you look, she has like plastic bags and she has like her big bags. If you see that they're very heavy, literally all that's in there is papers, and more papers, okay? Because, and you need people to help them. My mom will always, at the end of every Sunday, after the service, what my dad will do is he'll either ask me or he'll ask my brother to go and load up everything in the car. Because we have a lot of stuff. We're a family of 7. We have a lot of stuff to load back into the car. We have our own bags, and we have to load it back into the car. But then, what if one day when my dad calls me, he's like, John, you have to load everything in the car. And I go I'm like, okay, sorry. I'll go. I'm limping. I can't do anything, right? I act weak. I act lowly. My dad's not going to, most likely my dad will be like, shape up, stop acting. And then he'll tell me to load it in the car anyways. But he won't ask like a frail little old person to go and load the stuff in the car because he doesn't want you want someone to carry your burdens who's showing a sign of strength, showing a sign of power to carry your burdens. But this is what Jesus says, lay your burdens on me because I am meek and lowly. Meek and lowly. Does anyone here know what the word meek means? Yes, good. Meek is not just, sometimes we forget, meek does not just mean like, you're very humble, you're like, okay, thank you so much. I am meek, I am lowly. No, it doesn't mean that. What meek means is strength under control. Can everyone say strength under control? So strength under control means you have a great capacity to do a lot of things. You have a great and strong capacity. Jesus can move the mountains. He can calm the seas and the waves. But also, Jesus is the strongest there is. Colossians tells us that he's in the beginning. He created all things. But it's strength under control. Strength under control. Sorry, I'm thirsty. So strength under control is what meek means. And he also says lowly. So it's someone who has so much strength. It's not necessarily showing all of it, but it's all under control. He's not being so wrathful and destroying everything. But also, he uses the term lowly as well. Some of you might have humble. Now, what does lowly mean? It just means lowly, right? This is highly, this is lowly, right? Highly, lowly. Lowly, right? You think that if you're at the top of the company, the CEO, he's very high, right? He's high in the rank. But then the janitor, he is lowly. Good job, right? You have everyone, there's high and low. So here, even when the same word is being used, even just spatially, like low, Jesus is saying, I am strong but under control, but also I'm very low. These two qualities of someone who is meek and lowly, these are the perfect type of qualities for a certain type of person. Can you guess what type of job description would fit someone who is meek and lowly? Like the perfect job for this? Servant, right? This is the perfect job description for a slave back then, right? Because back then the masters, they would hire a lot of slaves, they would hire a lot of servants, and they don't want weak servants, but they also don't want servants who are going to say no to them. They don't want servants who are going to say, I can revolt, I can rebel, I can do all these things. You better watch out for me. No, they want servants who will just do as they're told. They know their place, lowly. They're a low place, bottom of the ladder, not even considered citizens. But also they're able to do their work. Meek and lowly is the servants, right? The mules. And Jesus says, for I am meek and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So what we need to see here is that if you want to follow Jesus, well, you should want to follow Jesus, but one of the reasons why you should want to follow Jesus is willing to be a servant for you. We see him as the suffering servant. He's the servant for you, and he is willing to be meek and lowly just to be able to take on all your burdens. Your burdens need to be carried, right? All burdens need to be carried. You cannot just leave them on the floor. So what Jesus is saying is this. You take your burdens, you can't carry them, give them all to me. Give them all to Jesus. Take all your burdens and give them all to Jesus. Because certainly we're not made to be the ones primarily carrying these burdens, especially the burden of sin, okay? We're not made to carry the burden of sins. No matter what sin is going to hurt you, sin is going to harm you, all this grief, all this loss, we're not made to carry that burden. Okay? We're not made to carry all this pain. But Jesus says, take off your heavy yoke and put on my easy yoke. Instead of being a slave, welcome into freedom. It's pretty easy to say that, right? Lay all your burdens at whose feet? Jesus' feet. And he won't just leave it there. He'll put them on his back and he'll carry them. By his stripes we are healed, right? In him we have redemption through his blood. There, the burden of sickness, it's gone. Well, it's not gone. He's carrying it. The burden of sin, he's carrying it. The burden of provision, he's carrying it. The burden of all the things that you need, right? The prayer of an effective saint, he is the one carrying it. Everything that you have, you need to cast upon Jesus. But it's not as easy always as it seems. How do we exactly do that? How are we supposed to cast our burdens upon Jesus? Okay. What are we supposed to do? Well, first of all, you need to surrender to him. Jesus is not going to carry the burdens of the people who do not surrender to him. Okay? He's not carrying those burdens. Okay? Even though he has the weight of the world on him, and he's the one holding all things together. Even the unbelievers, he's the reason why they still exist. He's the one making sure they survive. But you will not be able to cast your burdens if you do not surrender your life to Jesus. Okay? Another way that you surrender your burdens is praying. Okay? Praying and letting go. You're not just telling the Lord, I'm leaving all your burdens, all my burdens to you. Servant who is lowly and humble, lowly and meek in heart, I'm leaving all my burdens to you. It's not just that, but you're leaving your burdens to him because you trust him that he can carry it. Right? And not only that, but also in your heart and in your mind, you are leaving it all to him. Which is something that we have to learn to do, and it can all be summed up in one way, in trust. Trust and faith. You are not leaving your burdens to Jesus if you're not putting your trust in him, if you're not putting your faith to him. So let's say you are you're a traveler, traveling from Jerusalem to Samaria, and you're getting ready to leave, and you're getting ready to put let's say you have a big luggage, and you're going to put it on the mule. You're getting ready. So you're walking, you're like, okay, mule, let's get ready to go. We're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to be able to travel. And so you pick up all your luggage, but then you see how weak the mule is, and so you just carry it by yourself. Right? You see how small the mule is, you just carry it by yourself. Are you putting your trust in the mule? No, even if you tell the mule, you're like, yeah, you're an animal that was bred for this. I know that you can carry these luggages, but I'm going to carry it just so that it doesn't drop, right? Let's say you have some glass valuables in there. Do you guys leave your glass valuables to your children to carry? Like I remember when we would go to Viet Hoa with my mom, and we'd get like the Jufran bottles and all those things and all the glass bottles. We would carry the other groceries when we were kids, but then she would be the ones to carry the paper bags with the glass bottles. Why? She doesn't trust us. She doesn't trust us not to drop them. Of course, when we're older, we were able to carry the glass bottles. But sometimes it's like that, right? Jesus is getting ready to carry all their things, but we refuse to give it to him because we don't want the glass to break. We're not sure if we fully trust him. But Jesus is saying, my arms are open. I am meek and I'm lowly in heart. I'm willing to be your servant. I'm willing to carry everything for you, but you just need to give it to me. You need to hand over your burdens to me. But it requires faith. And a lot of the times, it's just something that happens in your mind and in your heart. You believe that he's carrying your burdens and you trust that he's taking care of it. And the Bible's pretty clear that what happens in your mind, what happens in your heart, it overflows into your actions. It overflows into your words. So you'll know if you've really laid down your burdens at the feet of Jesus, if your actions follow through with it. So if your burden is money and you're asked to sin in order to get money, if you've truly laid your burdens out for Jesus, then you don't sin to get the money. If your burden is your children, let's say your children are disobedient, your children don't know how to listen to you, and you've truly laid your burdens out on Jesus, then when your children are being disobedient, when your children seem to break your heart, you don't give up in your heart. You don't say like, oh, you guys are all just going to hell. You don't do that to them. What you do is you trust that Jesus is in control. Because Jesus is a real person. Amen? Not only that, but he is God. And he will take care of it. He's not just some person that we make up in our minds to say like, oh, everything's taken care of. No, he's an actual real person. And he's actually doing things to take care of you. He's putting people into place. But you need to leave that to him. let him take care of it. But also we would follow along with obedience. If you're not obedient to the next step that he tells you, then you really haven't laid down your burdens. Okay? You have not laid down your burdens. I have a close friend who, him and his wife, they were struggling with fertility issues. Right? And they were simply not getting pregnant. And part of it has to do with the fact that the wife, before they were married, she was involved in a lot of problematic things like drugs, alcohol, and things like that. And she could not let go of the fact that she did those things, of all the guilt that carried along with it. Because if you were very promiscuous, you were into drugs, you were into a lot of problematic things, and then you're trying to get pregnant, and then you're just never getting pregnant, what are you going to think in your mind? Whose fault is it? It's my fault. You think it's your fault. And so she had that burden of guilt on her head. Not only that, but then they also had the burden of going to the doctors, having to pay for all these medical bills. And not only that, but the doctor told them the treatment that you're experiencing, the hormonal treatment, all these things, it is very, very dangerous if you do it for an extended period of time. And if you're not getting pregnant after a while, I'm going to just let you know you have to stop it, because then you will get cancer. That's what the doctor told them. It's 100% certain that you'll get cancer if you do. And so it's a very risky thing. And they just could not let it go in the back of their mind to leave it all to Jesus. Leave it all to Jesus. But then we prayed with them, and someone had testified to them about their story of getting pregnant and fertility. And finally they decided, you know what, we're just going to wait for God's timing. That's another thing. If you're really leaving your burdens down to Jesus, then you trust that you're able to wait for God's timing. If you're not able to wait, then you haven't laid down your burdens. They trusted that they would wait for God's timing, and that they would just pray and wait. They stopped all the fertility treatments. I'm not saying fertility treatments are necessarily bad, but it wasn't working, so they just stopped all of it. And they decided to be content with what God's given them, but they would also pray, and they would wait. You pray if you're leaving your burdens to Jesus. And a whole year passed by, and then they thought, it made them pretty sad when they were focusing on it. And so they decided they'll just leave the burden. There's just all these different things. When you're not leaving your burdens to Jesus, sometimes your mind is so fixated on these things that it puts a bunch of more problems in your heart. So if your children are your burden, if your children are your problem, or if money is your problem, sometimes you don't leave it to Jesus. You're supposed to continually pray for these things, but there's only so much you can pray for. But sometimes you just end up thinking of worst case scenarios in your mind, that it just becomes an even heavier and heavier burden. So you know that you've laid your burdens if you're able to let go of thinking about it too hard and you just pray on it. Okay? And so we prayed with them. We laid hands on them. And we just trusted that. And so what they did is they just continued on their life, doing their normal things, praying to God, trusting in God, seeking out ministry. Until finally, after being years, a couple months off of the fertility treatment, they completely stopped it. She was pregnant. And they knew it was God because they had been advised that she should stop, because she's a competitive horseback rider. And so she was told, someone had told her once, maybe you should stop riding your horse if you want to get pregnant. But the doctor told her that actually the horse isn't the problem. The horse isn't preventing her. It's really her womb that's the problem. But someone who's a person of God, the doctor wasn't a Christian, but someone who's a Christian say, I think that if you want to get pregnant, you need to focus on, you should let go of the things in your life that are taking up so much of your time, giving you stress, like horseback riding. And when they decided to stop taking the fertility treatments, at that moment, she also got a call that her horse is sick and cannot be ridden for a while. So she got a call for that her horse is sick. And then shortly after that, they were pregnant. They were pregnant. So all these things, they left it all to Jesus. They gave it all to him, and they trusted in him. And they had stopped thinking about it. They said it was a complete surprise. And they were so overjoyed with it, to the point that they were just 1 week pregnant when they told us. And typically people who are struggling with fertility, they wait, right? They wait before telling that they're pregnant because they're scared of a miscarriage or something like that. But for them, they said they felt such a peace that they're like, they have the freedom to tell because they know that that God is going to take care of them, right? And now it's been a few months now, and now she's already begun to show, and they're even getting more excited, right? I'll update you when she gives birth. But it's amazing, right? When you lay down your burdens at the feet of Jesus, okay? So you have to pray, you have to trust in him, you have to obey anything that the Spirit is leading you to do to take care of these burdens. You need to be able to obey and trust in that, okay? If you're not able to do it, you really haven't laid down the burdens. You need to stop thinking about it so much. Stop coming up with the worst case scenarios in your mind. Take every thought captive to Christ. Let him be the one in control. Let him be the one. You need to let go of the other burdens in your life. Okay, you can't, Jesus didn't say, Jesus doesn't tell you that he will give you rest from only one burden, right? It's from all your burdens that you're required to take off. But understand this, when you first lay down your burdens at the feet of Jesus, the big one that you're going to be laying down when you give your life to him is you surrender your burden of sin. Understand that he has taken that all, okay? And so if you ever feel trapped in sin, just understand that Jesus has taken it all upon himself and that you don't have to carry those burdens anymore. Tonight we're going to talk about taking up his yoke and why is it so easy, but also what it's supposed to mean. But one thing that you should know about burdens, the burden of Jesus, the burdens that the world gives us versus the yoke of Christ, okay? Burdens are very, very heavy. How many of you have ever lifted weights? Right? Some people, oh, wow, I was surprised. Tita RC raised her hand. I didn't know that you lifted weights. But if you lifted weights, you know that if you're lifting something that's relatively light, it's going to be relatively easy to put down, right? Because it's light. You can just put it down. You don't have to. But let's say you're lifting something, or if you're carrying a couch with someone, it's like 200 pounds, or more than that, like 300-pound couch. Are you just going to be able to easily drop it and let it go? No. Why? Because it's going to break, or you're going to break your toe. Heavy burdens are harder to put down. And that's why you need someone to get it for you. When you're lifting weights, you need a spotter so that they can help you in case it falls. You need someone to carry your burdens, and that person is Jesus. And you will not be able to live life fully in the kingdom of God if you do not lay down your burdens. Remember Paul, when they were on the way to Malta? They were on the way to Rome, and what did God reveal to? What did they have to do so that they would not be completely shipwrecked? They had to unload some things, right? The people from what do you call it? The Romans, they wanted to unload the prisoners and cast them into the sea. But no, you need to unload your burdens, because if you don't unload your burdens, you will get shipwrecked. Very, very much shipwrecked. You're going to crash and burn. If you have a plane, do you guys remember that R&B singer, Aaliyah? She had a bunch of clothes on her plane. It was overloaded, and so it crashed, and she died. Yeah, it was in like the early 2000s. She crashed and she died because she had her whole wardrobe, her whole touring wardrobe was in the plane. What? Yeah, it was a private plane. Yeah, it was a private plane. Yeah. So if you have too much wardrobe, make sure you don't carry it around with you everywhere, because your planes will crash. Your burdens will make you fall. So you need to take off your burdens and leave them all to Jesus. Okay? Yeah, it's a small plane. So take off your burdens and leave them all to Jesus, and he will take care of you. If your problem are your children, you leave it to Jesus and he will take care of them. But understand this, when you leave your burdens to Jesus, you are surrendering control. Okay? When you leave your items on the mule or the donkey, you're not leaving your hand on the side. When you're leaving your kid to ride a bike, when you're teaching a kid to ride a bike, what do you do first? You hold the back, right? You want to make sure they fall. But that's not the way it is with Jesus, right? When you leave Jesus to do your burdens, you're not like just holding on like, oh, Jesus, I don't want you to drop my burdens. I don't want you to make it even harder to pick up. No, you leave it to him and then you obey with what he tells you to do. And also you have to really look in the scriptures. Sometimes just reading the scriptures and letting the Holy Spirit speak to you, it's a way to unload your burdens, right? Because as he reveals more and more to you through the scriptures, because that is his holy word, you will be able to unload your burdens. So, if you don't unload your burdens, you're not just going to cause problems for yourself. Okay? You're going to cause problems for other people around you as well. Okay? Like in the illustration of the shipwreck, Paul wasn't the only one on the ship. If you don't unload your burdens, the people that you work with, your family, you put them in danger as well. So I gave the illustration earlier at the beginning, the example of you walk into the house of someone, right? And then there's a great party, there's a great feast that you want to partake in. But what do you do with your shoes? You have to take them off, because if it was raining outside and you have dirty shoes, you're going to get the dirt inside the house. You're going to get the dirt inside the house. Of course, the master can clean up the dirt, but you're going to get dirt inside the house. So it's better to just take off your shoes at the door and wear the slippers that they gave you, right? And then sometimes we can fool ourselves into thinking that we've let our burdens go, even though we haven't, right? Because we're receiving some benefits, right? In the same way, like maybe you don't want to remove your shoes. They're very nice shoes. They're Nikes or I don't know. They're very nice shoes that you don't want to take off. So you stay outside of the house. You don't want to enjoy God's presence there. You don't want to leave your burdens. But some people can still bring you food outside. You can still, right, in our house, when we have parties, there's food inside and outside. But you will never be able to experience the fullness if you do not lay down all of your burdens. Do you want to lay down your burdens?